well, it is 12 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. This is our first event of 2026. We hold these monthly events on the last Wednesday of each month, and we go through October. I'm Candace Shively. I'm with the state with the Utah Division of Water Resources. As we get started, feel free to keep using that chat feature and just share where you're joining us, where you're joining from. It's always super fun to see just how far our reach is. Just some quick background as to why we're doing these events. We started this series last April with the goal of supporting people that are just planning, establishing, or maintaining waterwise landscapes or water efficient landscapes. Here in Utah, we do have a landscape incentive program, which offers up to $3 per square foot for lawn that is replaced with water efficient landscaping. That price point and eligibility does vary by location, and I'll email you guys some more information about that. If you are planning to participate in that program, big tip, do not kill or remove your lawn until your project has been approved. We do need to verify that there is living lawn within the project area before you start. If you want to check out slowtheflow.org, you can view eligibility, program requirements, incentive amounts, and again, I'll email that information out to everybody, as well as any resources that are mentioned during the event today, and just kind of a fun follow-up. This event is being recorded and it'll be posted on our YouTube channel, and I'll share that with you all as well. So to kick off our 2026 webinar season, we have Daryl Lindsey, founder and principal designer of YardFarmer, joining us. And Daryl is going to share some real world insight from waterwise landscape projects that her team has done. She's going to talk about what's worked well and what hasn't, and what their team has learned from those experiences. Before we get started, we're going to have our landscape experts, Ro and Ben, lead our maintenance minute. They're just going to share what to watch for, tasks that you might be doing in your landscape between now and our March event. Ro and Ben are both landscape pros with USU Extension. Ro's located in Emery County and Ben is down in Washington County. So hopefully between the two of them, we should have our geographically diverse state covered. So let's go ahead and start with Ro, and then Ben, and then we'll get started with the presentation.
Thank you for having me. I've just got a few ideas of things that you might be seeing or might need to do again, like Candace said, before we meet again in March. So these are in no particular order. And the one thing I do want to mention is it is an odd year. Our weather is not behaving the way it normally should. So all of these ideas may need to be adjusted forward or back depending on where you're at and exactly what kind of winter we end up with. So for the more northern part of the state, the cooler areas, all of these things are going to be happening sort of as we move towards spring. So when the soil starts to thaw, that's when we're going to be able to work in the garden and do all of these tasks. But when the soil is workable, this is a great time in March into early April is the time to be planting any bare root trees and shrubs you might have ordered. That's the time they want to wake up in your yard, so we want to get them planted early. Any trees that you've tried to protect through the winter, if you've got trunk wrap, burlap, anything like that, that needs to be coming off as the last of the snow starts to melt. We don't want to leave that through into spring. It sounds like some people in a few areas are already getting spring bulbs popping up. So when you start to see those pop out, just as before they bloom, just as the new growth is coming through, you'd want to consider fertilizing those bulbs. They put a lot of energy into creating the flowers, and they might need a little extra boost. If you didn't do it last fall and you're still interested in planting pansies, I know the expression is that they're kind of weak, but pansies are actually very, very hardy plants and can handle cold weather. So if you're ready for some spring color and have a chance to plant those, this is the time to do it. So for any grass that remains, or in this would also be the time to be applying pre-emergent herbicides to control any weeds in your lawn. So this one, I would suggest you contact maybe your local master gardener groups, or getting the timing of this to make it effective is going to be pretty site specific, and so um, uh, talk to people closer to you. But this is the time when you might be considering doing that. I don't get any kickbacks from USU's soil labs, but taking a soil sample, getting ready for gardening season, this is the time to do it as well. So when you're able to dig a soil sample, if it's not frozen, that's something to think about doing. Um, any perennials that you waited on last fall, you could cut those back. You want to get them cut back before they start to have a new flush of growth. And you might be able to divide those at the same time. Hold off on pruning any trees and shrubs. Just don't do it yet. And I know we're all excited, but hold off. It's not quite time. And then all of these things that you're going to be doing, I would suggest that you make sure that it's appropriate to be walking in your yard. You can ruin the structure of your soil. If it's too wet and you're compacting it, you're going to be doing some damage. So make sure that it's warm enough to be outside, but not so muddy and soggy that you're going to be destroying the soil. All right, that's all I've got. So we'll let Ben go.
All right. We hit the right button. Maybe. Okay. Hopefully you can see all that. Okay. Thanks, Candace. I had two tips I wanted to go over really quickly. This kind of stems from last year. From a lot of the things that I saw last year, where we have very similar winters, where we didn't really have one, especially down here in Washington County and some of the warmer parts of the state. Super mild, and very little moisture. So the first tip I wanted to point out is irrigation. This is a really big one. Last year, I got a lot of calls around the entire county to come and look at trees that were in decline. These calls came in usually in April and May, and it was mostly our evergreens. The problem that we were finding is that our evergreens are still definitely alive. All the trees are alive, even though some of them are more dormant than others, but they're still very active. They're still transpiring. They're still growing a little bit. But I had a lot of calls on Italian cypress and some of our Mundell pines because they didn't get any moisture. So typically, most years we shut off our irrigation systems for the St. George areas, usually in November to December. We usually don't turn them on again until spring gets here. But usually we get enough rain and moisture throughout the winter time that we're able to, those trees are just fine. They're happy. It's not a problem. But the last 2 years we got just very little moisture through the winter time, and it's such a long, prolonged period that a lot of these trees were declining. They weren't doing as well. And the Italian cypress seemed to get a little bit hit harder than some of our other evergreens, but something to keep in mind on years where it's just very dry. In the winter time to kick on your irrigation system if you're able to. If you have a system that you've had to blow out and get the water out of it, you don't want to put water back into it. It's winterized. You can take a hose out and just give them some water once to twice a month if we're not getting any moisture for the entire month or a month at a time. Is definitely encouraged, and your trees are going to be much, much happier and healthier as they come out of dormancy or as they're evergreens and never did go to sleep, really. Just something to keep in mind in some of our landscapes. On this slide, I put a couple, this is off of the Washington County Water Conservancy District website. They've done a pretty good job at giving people an idea of how often we should be irrigating. And for the most part, I think it's spot on and accurate, except for the caveat of December to March, where every year is a little bit different, especially the last two. Just something to keep in mind. So as you're doing different landscape designs, putting different trees in, just keep in mind that some of them do like a little bit more moisture as we're going through winter time. Then the second one I wanted to point out, Ro mentioned this a little bit on his slides. We're a little bit earlier than the northern part of the state, but putting a pre-emergence herbicide on. As we're going to more of a xeriscape landscape, we're using a lot more gravels, a lot more mulch, a lot more different covers instead of just lawn. One of the problems that I've seen with a lot of homeowners and a lot of calls I get is that we come out and we look at the weeds that have built up, and they're different than the dandelions and some of the grass weeds that we're used to. A lot of these get blown in during the winter time and in the fall. And a lot of homeowners have been switching to using pre-emergence instead of going out and spraying the weeds that are in their lawn. Pre-emergence work by targeting the seed as they germinate. They'll attack the roots, the radicle that's coming out of the seed, or the cotyledons or the first leaves that are going to be coming out of the ground. If they've emerged, though, a pre-emergence will not work. So if you're starting to see weeds in your yard, a pre-emergence herbicide isn't going to work. And these have to be put on prior to germination. But they're very effective. Typically, we put them on about 3 times a year. So we'll put them on early spring to catch those early spring weeds. We put them on the tail end of spring to catch some of those summer weeds, the warmer season ones. And then oftentimes we put them on at the end of the summer to catch the fall weeds. Most of our pre-emergence herbicides only last about 3 months. So something to keep in mind. The other thing is they have to be watered in. So if you put on the herbicide, if it's a granular or if it's even a spray that's already a liquid, they do have to be watered in to become active and work into the top inch of soil. Really, the top half inch of soil is where these are active. So some things to keep in mind if you're putting in a new landscape, you're wanting to stay on top of your weeds, these are phenomenal products. There's a lot of different ones out there. So kind of like Row, we don't recommend one over another. Just finding one that you're comfortable with or one that you want to make sure you read the label on it, you get familiar with it. They work really well for keeping the weeds down in your xeriscape landscape. So anyways, that's 2 tips that I have. So
Awesome. Thank you both for that insight. All right, let's get started. So we'll make sure we leave plenty of time at the end for questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. If you guys could use that Q&A feature versus the chat feature, it just helps me out a little bit on the back end. I really appreciate it. Daryl, I'm so glad that you were able to join us today. You are the founder and principal designer of YardFarmer, which is a sustainable design studio centered on native plants and water conservation. And you're located in Salt Lake Valley, correct?
Correct.
Great. But you take on projects from all over. I've enjoyed your Instagram feed and just seeing the projects you've done from all over the place. You're certified in both permaculture design and rainwater harvesting design. And your team, you guys have done more than 300 native waterwise landscapes, which is really impressive. And I'm really excited to learn and hear just about the things that have worked well for you and the things that haven't. And I'll turn it over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. This is really exciting. And when you said it was the first one of the year, I felt very honored. So thank you. I'm going to hit share to a presentation. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
Great. We were playing with this feature where I'm sort of superimposed on, and it's a very new thing. So bear with us. Okay. Everyone can see my presentation okay?
It's perfect.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone. My name's Daryl. I'm, as Candace said, the founder of YardFarmer, which is a sustainable landscape design studio. We're based in Salt Lake City, Utah, but we design for, honestly, the entire lower 48 with caveats, but certainly all across Utah. I focus on water conservation and native plants, helping people save water by converting typically away from bluegrass lawns. So I've worked a lot with the Utah Water Savers program. Dozens, if not hundreds, of our clients have applied for the Utah Water Savers program already and are in the process or have already converted their yards to waterwise landscapes. The average yard farmer full property design, and we're able to calculate this using a volume calculation, saves somewhere around 100,000 gallons per year. This is a typical like 1/4 acre to 1/3 of an acre property. That's if we're converting away from a full yard of Kentucky bluegrass, where we're talking about 2 to 3 inches of water a week for that yard to stay super lush and green. If we convert away, we're able to calculate the water needs of the plants that we're converting to, and we're at about 100,000 gallons per year. My front yard, which I converted from bluegrass to a full kind of wild witchy cottage garden, saves 90,000 gallons. So when we're talking about collective impact and the ability to save a whole bunch of water, it's not that many yards. Like if we're talking about saving 1 million gallons of water a year, that's not that many in this context. So everybody who's watching this, who's thinking about converting their yard to a water-wise landscape, if 10 of you do it, we're at 1 million gallons. And if 20 of you do it, it's going to keep going up from there. And that's really fun and exciting to think about. I'm going to try to be fast. I am a bit yappy, and I apologize in advance if I start to go over time. Here's kind of what I have planned today. I want to talk about the types of waterwise landscapes that we design and that you could potentially consider for your yard, and then walk you through sort of our team's waterwise landscape design 101, where you could then take those principles and implement them in your own yard, the major pitfalls and mistakes to avoid, and then what we've learned from working with clients who are overcoming these mistakes, and so on. Okay, so just a quick rundown. These are my least favorite landscapes of all time. I don't love these options here. Bluegrass used as wall-to-wall carpeting, just for the water use alone, the chemicals, the maintenance, not my favorite. I'm using the word zero here in quotes because a lot of people will call this xeriscaping. They'll call it zero-scaping because that sounds similar. But to me, a zero-scape is when it's just rocks and nothing else. And just like Ben and Ro sort of implied, when you have these wide swaths of exposed gravel or soil, weeds are very prone to come in. It's hot, it's messy, the debris doesn't look nice. So while I understand the intent here is to save water, I think there are better ways to do it. And then artificial turf, which I just labeled as hot plastic because I think we can just do better when it comes to reducing maintenance and water use in a yard and make it a lot more enjoyable and cooler and more temperate in those spaces as well. My favorite landscapes, or at least better water-wise alternatives, would be things like a local scape. And I'm using that term because there are very specific parameters that the Local Scapes program, which is a Utah local program, what's the word I'm looking for? Evangelizes. And one of them is the central open shape of lawn. And the reason I like this is because it's meeting people where they're at, in that you do not have to have a full-blown meadow, cottage, garden in your yard if you want to save water and do a little better by the planet. You can still have a really beautiful little lawn shape. Then we have xeriscape, the actually correctly pronounced term, xeriscape, which is, I believe, a trademarked term just meaning low water landscape, but it's come to be recognized as the sort of gravel yards with well adapted and native plants sort of dotted throughout. The reason I don't design this way by default is because the more exposed soil and gravel you have, the more pressure you are going to receive from weeds. And pre-emergent herbicides, as mentioned, are possible, but if we can get density, are possible to use is what I mean. But if we get density with our plantings where we can be covering that soil and competing out the weeds, then we can reduce over time the need to use chemicals. And specifically, the ones that I'm really against using would be sprays like glyphosate and other things. Honestly, pre-emergents are kind of awesome and magical. And then, of course, just native plant paradise. So this image that you're seeing here is pretty typical of what you might see us design. We do a lot of designs with front open lawn shapes as well, but we're trying to provide a really wide range of native plantings that are staggered bloom times throughout the season and providing really critical habitat for pollinators. Okay, so I have some examples of some water-wise landscapes just to show you that they can look very different while still achieving the goals that we're trying to achieve, where we're helping out native wildlife and reducing water use. So I'm just going to go through all examples of great landscapes that I would qualify as water-wise. Water-wise landscape, vegetable garden in the front and some cute little plantings. Water-wise landscape, much more modern, staggered with like the very similar pops of color, the orange and the red, and then ground covers. Water-wise landscape. This is kind of like what my front yard looks like. I personally want somebody to walk by my house and ask if a witch lives there, but not everybody loves that look. This is also a water-wise landscape, and it's much more modern, super monochromatic, and honestly pretty cool to look at with the mid-century lines happening here. And I think that's a catalpa tree in bloom, and that's fabulous. Also water-wise landscape, still very cottagey. One might say witchy. I'm going to stop using that word now. Okay, so the next thing, which I've already kind of mentioned, is that you don't need to remove all of your grass in order to save water. Of course, the area that you retain as grass is going to need more water than the areas that you remove the grass from. However, if we reduce that grass shape to an efficient shape that can be watered efficiently with high efficiency, I've used that word too many times. So I need to stop saying efficiency, but that can be irrigated with high efficiency sprinkler heads, then even though that bluegrass still technically requires the same number of inches per week to stay that emerald green color that we're looking for, the actual amount of water that you're using will go down because there's no overspray and no waste. So here's an example of one of our designs from last year that has a lot of very cool things going on and collections of native plantings, activity zones like a playground area and a fire pit, but there's still quite a decent amount of lawn, and that's a-okay in my book. Here's an example. You can just see a little bit of lawn here. So this is heavy on the plantings and then keeping that central open shape for some negative space. And here again is that example I showed you earlier of that. Okay, so walking you through quickly some landscape design 101 tips, and I'm trying to synthesize our design process as a studio, but make it very accessible to the average homeowner who's doing this themselves without softwares and a bunch of technical knowledge. So the most important bit of this whole process is also the least fun and the one that I most often see clients who are trying to take on their own landscape design skip, because you want to get straight to the decision making where you're deciding what plants to put in and what pathways to put in and how you want it to look and feel. But we really do have to take some time and walk around the space and observe what we're seeing. So I personally would recommend you find some way to map out your property or even just look at your property from above. So if that's going on Google Earth or your city's GIS system and getting some aerial imagery of your property, you can then screenshot that and use it accordingly just to mark up with truly print it out, use a Sharpie, put it on a tablet, whatever works for you to kind of take notes on it as you're going around. While you're walking around the property, note the existing plants you want to keep, mark those out. You'll also want to map out constraints like utility lines, either above ground ones that you can't put a tree under or in ground ones that you don't want to disturb too much or put a big tree on top of. And then this is the big one and the one that intimidates people a little bit. You want to get a sense of what the microclimates on your property are, because different plants, even native plants that are all technically adapted to here, there are native plants that live in the forest and there are native plants that live in the prairie, and there are going to be certain pockets of your yard where plants will do better than other pockets. And so what I do when I'm kind of loosely, roughly mapping out microclimates is I move around the space and I look for anything that could cast shade. And shade, your light conditions are going to change throughout the year. So you need to kind of think critically about where the sun is in winter versus where it is in summer. And a good rule of thumb is in winter, it's going to be south of you and low. And in the summer, it's going to be kind of directly overhead and will actually swing north of you a little bit. So I'll hover my mouse. In the summer, the sun is rising over here and going like that, whereas in the winter, it's rising over here and setting over here, and it's low. So if you've got a big evergreen tree like this in the yard, in the winter, this is very icy, very damp. You can imagine that in the spring, it's going to be holding on to a lot more moisture over there. Even in the summer, there's a lot more light over the, or a lot less light over there. And you want to mark that because the plants that we're selecting here and the plants that we're selecting for here probably shouldn't be the same plants. It's annoying, but it's important that we do this because it's going to influence all of the decisions we make later. Then step 2, you want to, before you even think about a plant, you want to map where your feet will go. And I say this because if we're removing Kentucky bluegrass and ripping it all out, then you're no longer walking on a flat, easily traversable surface anymore. And so you need to plan for your flow of traffic through the space. I think it's also important to note that you should plan for function here wherever possible. I had a consult yesterday where I asked them, how do you want to spend time in the yard? And I sort of watched them glitch and be like, what do you mean? I just wanted to put plants on the fence line. They sort of were surprised by the idea that the space is still meant for them to enjoy, because it had just been a bluegrass wasteland and they hadn't gone out there and spent a lot of time in their yard ever. And so if you want a shed or a patio or a pathway or a lawn, or I've seen it all, disc golf course, pottery studio, like plan for that first and then map out your flow through the space like you would plan a floor plan for a home. And the lawn is a room and the patio is a room and the path is a hallway. And that way you can feel like a sense of pull and direction that invites you into the space to enjoy it. Your plantings, especially those perennial plantings that we're going to get into, those are going to go literally everywhere else. And so you don't have to ever design in a flower bed. You don't have to have lawn be this bluegrass carpet and then you cut the squiggly wiggly little flower bed into it. We're not doing that anymore. The flower bed is here in the absence of the place where your feet will go. And then the flower bed is here in the absence of the place where your feet will go. And you can just invert those shapes and then imagine filling those with all of your favorite, hopefully native, drought tolerant plants. Then you place the plants. You can see now where I've built those flower beds. And I specifically just drew these really as a quick scribble on my tablet because I wanted to show that you don't need to be using a full drafting software to plan your landscape. Draw it in Sharpie and marker on your satellite imagery. You're going to choose the plants. Now that you know where your flower beds are, we've got this one, this one, this one, this one, and then even back here. Remember those microclimates we talked about earlier, because when you're picking which plants should fill these flower beds, only do the full sun, low water plants in those hot, dry places. Whereas as we move into those shadier bits, you can start to experiment with things that might want a little more water, a little more shade. Okay, here's an example of a bluegrass front yard. This is a consult I did last week, so it's just top of mind. This is what we came up with to kind of bring out the mid-century modern design and put flow through the space. So the only lawn we're keeping is right here. Everything else is going to a drought-tolerant native plant. You can now go back. This is the same exact thing that I drew here on my tablet. So you can see the pathway, the lawn space. Sorry, I'm pointing with my finger instead of using the cursor. The lawn space, the pathways, and the native plants. And that's what that will look like in 3D. Okay, we're getting into the pitfalls. How am I doing on time? Pretty good. These are some mistakes that I would invite you to avoid while swapping out your landscape. For managing weeds and invasives, I personally am not a fan of landscape fabric. I hope this is not a controversial take in this office here. But I find what happens is, as Ro and Ben mentioned, the weeds that we're trying to avoid are weed seeds that are blowing in by air or coming by bird. So when we're putting plastic or whatever water permeable fabric it is down, we're suppressing one layer of weed seeds that already exists in the soil, but not doing much to suppress the new ones that are going to blow in. And so what you end up with is a more compacted, more nutrient deprived soil that weed seeds are still going to enjoy rooting directly on top of, especially once there's debris or mulch or things that will create a soil substrate for those weed seeds to germinate in. And so I personally would just not use it at all. And you could rely on the use of some pre-emergent herbicides or honestly, just emotionally preparing for the hand weeding necessary to make it to the point where we can get to this full coverage here. Because this really beautiful ground cover forward park strip is in many ways serving like a living mulch that is helping to compete out weeds. Will you still get some weeds? Absolutely. But far fewer than this little situation up here is. And honestly, the wood chips spilling onto the sidewalk with the broken weed fabric is one of my personal pet peeves as a landscape designer as I walk around neighborhoods. Other sort of in this category, pitfalls to avoid would be large areas of exposed soil, mulch, or rock Again, I mentioned this earlier. I like plants to be the thing competing out weeds. Planting invasive species, that kind of goes without saying, but a lot of them are sold in big box stores. So do your research if you're picking up a plant just because you think it's pretty. I do that all the time. I love an impulse buy, but type the name into your phone, search native range and then invasive range if it's not native to make sure that you're not perhaps doing more harm than good. And then not planning for maintenance. Again, all of this is kind of related, but I do think working that into either your chores, how you're budgeting your time, or your actual financial budget, understanding that while a landscape is establishing and trying to get to this point, there is going to be a period where weed pressure is higher and it doesn't look the way you want it to look yet. And really being realistic about that and planning for it. And if that means having a crew come in and help you stay on top of weeding the first 2 seasons, at least we've worked that into the budget for your overall landscape design, and it's not a big surprise. Okay, other pitfalls, irrigation and water use. Not grouping plants by water need and not considering microclimate. Those are both related to the subject I was going through earlier. I'm going to go back to this little scribble here to demonstrate. I would really like to see all of the plants in this bed and maybe even this bed, depending on how your irrigation is zoned, to have similar, if not identical, water needs to each other so that you can have the same drip line through this entire area, irrigating all of those plants. If we have 90% of these as fully drought tolerant natives and then a wall of lilac bushes, the lilac bushes are going to struggle, or we're going to be doing a lot more watering than we need to be doing on all of these amazing xeric natives just to keep the lilacs alive. And if you have a gorgeous wall of lilacs, I'm not telling you to rip them out. I don't like ripping out healthy, mature plants that clients enjoy unless they are invasive plants. I am saying, though, that we're going to need to water those lilacs up to their water needs. So let's group plants that have similar water needs only next to the lilacs. And then in a different zone, we can have our drought tolerant and xeric natives. And you'll still see, especially if you're reducing lawn and so on, you'll still see that the overall water use of your property is going to go way down and you get lilacs. So it's a win all in all. The next thing would be the wrong or inefficient irrigation type. The general rule of thumb that I like to follow is high efficiency pop-up sprinklers in any lawn shapes that you have, and drip irrigation with zoned for hydro-zoned areas where each of these zones have similar water needs, drip irrigation everywhere else. My favorite thing to do, and you can do your research and decide, is just to have simple 1/2-inch drip lines, the bigger ones, not the tiny spaghetti tubes that just go up, down, sort of 1 to 2 or even 3 feet apart, depending on how much those drip lines emit. I think it's simple and easy and it works, and we don't have to get overcomplicated with all of these little emitters and wiggles and squiggles. I see all the time that some clients have DIY'd, for example, they've converted their yard to something that maybe looks like this, or maybe if they've gotten rid of all of their lawn and put in the amazing plants, but the irrigation piece intimidated them and they didn't switch to drip. And now they have pop-up sprinklers from their old lawn system that they're trying to use to water something that is really not designed to be watered by pop-up sprinklers. The plants end up blocking the sprays end up damaging the plants, and you don't get an efficient and even distribution of water. So it is worth taking the time to convert over to drip for these areas, even though it can be either a little bit more costly or just a little bit more intimidating to learn. But the resources are here. I have a resources page at the end of this presentation with the websites you can go to learn about these things. Irrigation, I'm going to be so transparent. I've decided it's not my personal ministry. I will outsource this in my own yard. I'm not doing my own irrigation anymore. And I think that's okay, to be realistic. But at the end of the day, the conversions are pretty simple. And I'm just choosing to pay somebody so that I don't have to watch the YouTube videos. But the YouTube videos are there for you if you are handier and braver than me personally. Okay, and then the inefficient lawn shape. I've already kind of gone into this a bit, but the old way of landscaping, it looks like this, and we've all seen it. It's very popular in the early 2000s and late 90s. The bluegrass is rolled out as this wall-to-wall carpeting, and then the flower beds are designed. So instead of actually planning on the lawn being functional space that's used for play, the lawn is just the absence of other things, which is very difficult to maintain, very difficult to irrigate. And you end up with this sort of, again, I'm using weird words, but wibbly wobbly concrete curbing along your fence lines. I want to do the other thing where you are not designing flower beds, you are designing pathways and patios and lawns, and then the flower beds will fill all of those spaces. Okay, lessons learned. I was really trying to go fast and I did good. We're not even at 12:45 yet. So the lessons learned, and this is critical both as a professional design studio and for a homeowner doing their own yard. Do not skip the observation phase. If you're brand new to the house, I'd even maybe encourage you to, you could start chipping away at the easy stuff if you're eager, but take a season to observe where water is flowing, where water is pooling, which areas get absolutely torched by sun at certain points of the year versus others. And you can start mapping that out on that printout that I showed you or presented to you. And it might not be something you do in a week. It might be something where you scribble those observations over an entire growing season so that you can really use your design to solve problems later. The biggest thing that I think sets apart a professional or professional looking design from a more amateur one is that we are using design to solve problems, and every design choice that we make should solve at least one, if not more, problems. And so I want to layer, if there's a big pain point like water pooling there, not only do I want to solve this water pooling issue, I want to turn it into a good thing. And so we might regrade that area so that the water pools there on purpose and put a big flush of plants there that can survive long drought periods while it's not raining and then thrive while it is raining. And suddenly this water pooling is no longer a mess, and it is in fact a thing that's saving you a bunch of water and maintenance on a beautiful little corner of your yard. This also goes into designing for function first. Even if the whole reason we're doing this is because we want to save water and help the pollinators, it's still your yard and you still need to be able to move through it in a way that you enjoy, because otherwise you won't be out there to maintain it. You want to make it as easy for you to enjoy the space as possible, and that will make it a more sustainable project for you long-term for the water savings and the pollinators. So before we even think about the plants, make sure you've thought about how your yard is used and the entire flow from both side gates and all doors, how you're getting in and out of the house to every corner of your yard. And I've already hammered this in, but please be realistic about maintenance. Year 3 is a fabulous year. Year 4 is amazing. I really do think in yards that are designed like this, at least in my experience, the maintenance goes down and changes, where it doesn't feel like you're just doing hard labor, really difficult chores just to reset it to baseline. Maintenance becomes like curating and dividing and pruning a little bit and playing around in your space rather than just I'm on my hands and knees yanking weeds out of mulch. But those first 3 years are tough, and you can outsource help. You could use pre-emergent herbicides, but it's important that you go into that knowing that it's a journey to get there. Okay, and then I have some resources for you. slowtheflow.org, localscapes.com, utahwatersavers.com, and the conservationgardenpark.org. These are all great websites that if you're thinking of converting your own yard, I'd go through all of them just as thoroughly as you can. There are resources about converting to drip irrigation. There's resources on how to get the rebate and apply for the rebate. I also have a what is it, a list of design books that I really love. You can see that over at bookshop.org with my username here. These are just books on Utah native plants, landscape design, architecture, all of the things that we use as a studio, if that interests you. And you can find me over at yardfarmer.co. And that's my presentation.
Oh, that was fabulous. Thank you so much for your time and expertise. We have a lot of great questions coming in. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There is a survey that will just auto-generate once you leave this event. If you could just take a minute to give us a little feedback, we always appreciate that. And then another thing that might interest you, Daryl mentioned Localscapes a few times, which is a 1 to 2 hour course, either in person or virtually. That's offered throughout the state, and we have a lot of those coming up this spring. So I'll send that in the follow-up email as well, so you can take a look and see where those classes are located. Okay, so let's get into the questions. You mentioned microclimates, and we had a great question come in from McKenna just related to like long-term planning. So if you have a lot of trees that you've planted on your property, but they're all very, very small, like how do you plan for microclimates as things establish?
Ooh, this is such a great question. And it's nuanced because it'll depend on the trees, the placement of the trees, and the mature size of the trees. But if we're talking about you've planted many trees that will grow quickly and will grow to be big, big shade trees, you can assume that your microclimate will change over time. There's a couple of different ways to go about succession planting or planting something in the interim. And again, it's hard to give a one size fits all answer because it'll depend on the goals for the space overall. We've done a number of different things for clients in this situation. One, you could get the trees in the ground and I don't know how much you guys will like this answer, but you could get the trees in the ground and kind of leave the grass for now if you're planning on a few years down the line planting out a landscape. That's this sort of, if we're doing silver, bronze, gold, that's the silver option. Another thing that we do often is we will plan for an inexpensive way to get a nice looking landscape with plants that love full sun and a lot of heat, but can tolerate some shade. And then as that fills in, as the trees get bigger and bigger, if you're noticing things kind of receding because the shade is getting denser, that's when you start replacing in groups some of the fuller sun plants with the shade plants. What's great about herbaceous perennials, let's say common yarrow, just because that's an easy one, you can slam a shovel in the ground and just move that 10 feet to the right when the time comes. So as that microclimate changes, it might just be time to rearrange the garden. And again, I wish I could give you a one size fits all answer because some trees, if we're planting crazy oaks, they're going to be a shade, it's going to be a shade garden for your grandchildren and not for you. Whereas some trees might in 5 years be already providing shade and shifting things. So depending on how quickly your trees grow, you might decide to just plan for the present and deal with it 10 years from now, or you might decide to slow the install so that you can use those funds later for your shadier garden.
Awesome. Great feedback and ideas. Would you mind just like backtracking a bit and talking about how you're mapping out the sun moving across the landscape so they can kind of plan for that microclimate?
Absolutely. I will just throw out an app that makes it much easier. There's an app called Sunseeker. I use it every day. I use it every day of my life. It is like an augmented reality thing. I'm opening my phone. That's what I'm doing. It looks like this, but then when you hit the 3D view button, it actually shows you the path of the sun through your camera. So you can go get down at plant level, get on the ground, and then if you see those lines passing through a giant evergreen tree, you can assume that there's shade wherever you are standing. If you see just wide open sky where those lines are, you can assume that that's full sun. If it's only shady in the winter, let's say the lines go down below a house or a building or a tree in the winter, but then starting in March, you start getting full sun. If you're planting plants that are deciduous, perennials, flowering things, or deciduous shrubs, anything that's not photosynthesizing in the winter, you can feel good about planting that there as well. Other than using an app like that, I like to just walk around and really observe what an area feels like. If it's already in dense shade, because it's a little northern side yard with a giant pine tree, you can start to get the sense that this is a pretty shady microclimate. And you can dig down in the soil and see if your soil's holding onto water or if it's still quite dry over there. And just mark those observations on your little map.
Awesome. That's a great suggestion. And I'll share that resource in the follow-up email. So if you didn't catch the first part of that, we've got you covered. Okay, this is a great question, and I struggle with this a bit too. So this user is having a hard time figuring out like which native plants or even just perennials come up sooner, and they're feeling like their entire yard is just filling in and looking great in July, but then the rest of the season, like especially early spring, it looks kind of blah. Do you have any like favorite plants that are early in the spring, or how can somebody figure out like when they're actually going to pop up out of the ground?
Yeah, I believe that on the resources page, the Conservation Garden Parks website has a really great plant finder tool that designates bloom time as well. And what you're looking to do is add plants that really start to provide interest in April or May, depending on what elevation you're at. It depends on when spring starts, right? But if you're down in the valley, then April interest, you're going to see like blue flax and creeping phlox. We've got a couple native phloxes, moss phlox and cushion phlox, but creeping phlox is native to the Midwest and East Coast and is widely available at Home Depot, Lowe's, and most garden nurseries this time of year or soon. I like creeping phlox a lot because it's so small that even if I have an established garden, I can really tuck it along pathways and in the front of borders without having to divide or move too many plants. So I'm able to kind of push for that early spring interest without changing everything. I also find, and this is going to be trickier if you use pre-emergent herbicides, but I have also found that blue flax, which is a native wildflower that we have, and California poppy, which is adjacently native. It's not super native, as my favorite plant in the whole world. Both of them germinate really well by seed, and I've been really enjoying just interseeding those two together. And the poppies will start blooming really early. I actually have germinated poppy plants in my yard right now. They haven't flowered, but I know what they look like, and they're all little green tufts. And the blue flax also germinates and blooms very quickly compared to some other wildflowers. I will actually seed them in color blocks so that it doesn't look like when you throw a wildflower seed mix on the ground and it all grows up like glitter confetti and it looks kind of messy. I'll do a big ribbon of poppy and a big ribbon of flax, and then it almost looks like you've planted them as perennial starts. But again, inside me are two wolves because I can't use pre-emergent herbicides because I've got a bunch of poppy seeds that I'm waiting to germinate in my yard.
It's a tricky balance.
Tricky balance.
Okay, so early on you mentioned that the average project saves around 100,000 gallons of water, and that your landscape has saved close to 90 or over 90,000. Are you, did I miss that up?
Just my front yard.
Just your front yard.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Are you using like water meter data, or how are you determining that savings?
Yeah, so I was able to, for my own personal yard, because I don't ask people to send me their water bills unless they want to. But for my own personal yard, I was able to verify this just by looking at the water savings. But it actually started with just a very simple volume calculation of length times width times depth, where if a lawn is needing an inch of water a week and you calculate that into cubic feet and then convert it to gallons, you can see how much water is being applied to a specific area. And then we look at the water needs of our super xeric plants, all of the plants in my yard, and there's no lawn. It's just, like I said, it's a witchy, meadowy, weird looking place, and I love it to death. Those only need a quarter to a half inch of water every 10 to 14 days. And I've pushed that before and they do fine. So it ends up saving just a huge amount of water.
That's great. When you are working with your clients, just designing their space, what questions are you asking them as they go through that observation phase?
Oh, brilliant. We have client homework that we send them that asks a whole bunch of questions. I also have a sort of phase in the consult where I say this is the fun part where we just complain, and I really want them to complain as much as they possibly can think to do, and no detail is too small. And we take down every single pain point. And this could be something like the ground is lumpy when I walk on it. It could be my neighbors are loud, or it's really hot and dry in this one spot. But there really is no detail too small, because if it irritates you, we could probably make a cool design choice to fix it. I also ask about, I mean, all of those things we talked about, utility lines, how the space will be used, soil type, if they've noticed if water pools anywhere, if water drains really easily. Yeah, it's a whole questionnaire. It's 2 or 3 pages long.
Great. Okay, switching gears to irrigation. Two-part question. Do you always use drip irrigation? And do you always put it under your mulch? Well, 3-part question. And at what point do you install it? Like, are you doing it before you plant? Are you doing it after you're planting?
Great question. The most common situation that we see, especially if we're working with contractors who are doing this in an install, is that the mulch will be applied beforehand, and then the irrigation, which is a 1/2-inch drip tube, is run in just a very simple configuration, left, right, across the yard. And then we lightly bury them once the plants are in, so that they aren't super visible, but can be easily accessed and checked for breaks and other like maintenance concerns. Because if they're buried too deeply, you won't know if anything's wrong, and it's harder to kind of get to them. And you actually, both of you might know more about this than me. As I've said, irrigation is not my personal ministry in life, but I think it works pretty well. I don't always use drip, but almost always we use drip in the planting beds. There are some exceptions where we're using a design method called passive rainwater harvesting, and we're actually grading the flower beds to be basins and swales where water pools naturally. And it's a very specific situation where the client knows that the flowers might go dormant in a drought period, but they're really trying to use almost no supplemental irrigation in a landscape, and they're okay with hand watering to establish later on. This is not something you can do if you want the Utah Water Savers rebate. It's not something you should do if you are a busy, stressed out person, or like me, have ADHD or all of these things, because there's a lot more responsibility if you can't set it and forget it. But it is possible. We've done it in Tucson, Arizona, and we can do it here. It's possible to have a yard that requires 0 supplemental irrigation if you're grading the soil effectively and you're okay with it getting a little crispy in July. And then it wakes up again when we get those rains.
Awesome. I love rainwater harvesting. Okay, we're getting quite a few questions about or just comments related to your city not being eligible, so you're not eligible for the landscape incentive program. If that is the case, our recommendation is to reach out to your local elected official. There is a landscape ordinance for new construction that we do require them to adopt before residents in that location are eligible. If you have any questions on that, or if your city has questions on that, feel free to reach out to us at the state and we can get you in contact with the right individual. There's also some questions coming in that aren't really related to the topic. I just want to point out row and just extension as a whole as a resource. We're really lucky in the state of Utah in just having an extension office in every county, which is not the norm across the nation. So they're there to help you. So if you have questions on irrigation or plants or even things not related to the landscape, reach out to them and they can point you in the right direction. Okay, back to Daryl. We have a few folks that are interested in green mulch or living mulches. What are some of your favorites?
Great question. I wish I could give blanket answers. My answer cannot always be it depends. If you're talking about something that is specifically a low growing ground cover, then I keep wanting to nuance it. A good blanket one that works up into part shade and is super drought tolerant is a turf type yarrow called yak yarrow. It can be used as a lawn alternative, and it's very bunching and can clump together and be mowed. You could use it like a lawn alternative. I also use it around flagstone steppers, sort of as a creeping thyme or moss replacement. And you can even string trim or weed whack it down. It does flower up to a couple of inches tall. And the little fronds do really look like moss from far away, which is really fun. I will, depending on the microclimates, change those ground covers. As we move into the shady climates, I love doing alpine strawberry. You can buy that in flats of 32 and just plant the little tiny baby strawberries through the sort of forest zone. And then as you move into those high sun zones, there are cool like ground covery sedums. I'm not going to be mad if you use creeping thyme or Turkish veronica. I think they're nice, and I use creeping phlox a lot for early spring interest. However, green mulch does not have to be a ground cover. Green mulch can just be dense coverage of an area. So if you've got a big wide fence line, big old shrubs, and then a 6 foot wide border of 3 foot tall perennials, plant them close together, and that can still be the living mulch that keeps your soil cool and helps with moisture retention and suppresses weeds and looks good.
Awesome. Great suggestions. Ro, do you have any favorites?
Oh, I have too many. I was just going to mention that it depends is always the right answer in biology. So yeah, you're doing great.
It really just depends on their unique situation. Because do you want to walk on it or not? Yarrow's great to be walked on. Alpine strawberry, kinda, but you might squish some baby strawberries. They are quite small. Um, yeah, I could keep going.
So if someone does want to change from just a typical bluegrass lawn to one of those suggestions, or even just adding like a low water use grass variety, is that something that they can just overseed or plant within their existing lawn, or is it better to just start from scratch?
And it depends again. There are some cool options that will work okay with overseeding. Of course, if you have existing bluegrass in your lawn, then there will still be some bluegrass in there, and that's okay. If I were to do a landscape conversion where I keep my central open shape lawn, and I'm basically just cutting out the shape I want to keep and leaving it alone, and I don't want to rip it all out and replace it, I would overseed it with probably either just straight yak yarrow. You can also buy them as plugs, and you could just plug your existing lawn with the yak yarrow, and that'll start to mix in. Or they have eco lawn blends that'll be like a micro clover and a dwarf fescue and a yak yarrow together. And they do best when seeded on bare level soil, but they will still take in smaller quantities if you overseed. And I kind of love sometimes just being lazy and patient and just overseeding a couple times over and over again to get it to take.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Okay, just out of respect for everyone's time, we're going to wrap up there. Daryl, very, very much appreciate your expertise and your time. Presentation was wonderful. Ro, thank you as well. I'm going to send a follow-up email. If we didn't get your question, I apologize. Feel free to reply to that email, and we'll get you to the right person. Again, this is being recorded. Please fill out that survey for us, give us some feedback, and hopefully we see everybody next month.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. See ya.